around me falls, trapped between these four walls. I'm so restless, alone and cold. I got a fever that burns my soul. I never thought it would reach this point now. I just can't put this down. Now my bridges are burning to the ground.
Raj Mehta is a licensed master's level therapist with the state of Michigan who has dedicated his life to helping people reach their full potential. Life is short, fortune favors the bold.
She told me if I use once more, she'll be walking out that door. Here I stand, broken, bruised. Doesn't matter if I use. I look around and everybody's gone. I thought of something that I found. Just one more's all I'm looking for.
Hi, I'm Raj Mehta, and welcome to Ask the Therapist. We have a different kind of way of looking at addiction today. We're looking at society and policies and how they infect, reflect, and actually induce or even reduce addiction in our world. Addiction does not occur in a vacuum. It occurs in our society, and people and institutions and organizations and media will reflect back and forth the impact of addiction and the behavior in addiction. And so in America, we live in a world where on the micro level, the individual is taking the drugs, but on the macro level, our prison systems, our policies, our police officers, they respond to the behavior and the active components of addiction. In our society, we have what's called mixed messages. We tell people to not become alcoholics and addicts. We make alcohol and drugs readily available. So with regards to policies that kind of increase or are pro-addiction, having alcohol and drugs readily available is definitely a negative, because you can go to certain areas in certain towns and in certain neighborhoods and everybody knows what's going on there. I can buy heroin in this area. I can buy pills over here. My friend is selling me weed over there. And so even websites like Silk Road are able to make people so accessible to drugs. And right now in China, we have a huge amount of pharmaceutical drugs and recreational, we call that research chemicals that are coming through. A second pro-addiction component is not having treatment available. You know, everyone that looks for treatment doesn't get the opportunity to walk into a treatment center and get a bed immediately. Even with the best insurance and even with cold hard cash, if you're looking for a treatment center bed, for cash, looking at about $500 to $700 a day in most of the good treatment centers. And if you're going to be going there county funded, if you're going to be going to like a place like PACE, oftentimes you got to wait 1 to 2 weeks. People have died waiting to get help in a treatment center for their addiction. Number 3, looking at the prevention of jobs for former addicts. Most people that use drugs or alcohol get arrested and get in trouble. And the problem with that is that many of those charges involve felonies. It is almost impossible to get a job with a felony. Not even McDonald's or Burger King will hire you if you have a felony conviction. So we have a completely marginalized community of addicts and alcoholics, oftentimes that are completely sober, are no longer using drugs and alcohol. They can pass a drug test all day long, but there's no place to work. And that kind of spirals them back into addiction. Number 4, keeping certain areas drug saturated. Everybody knows that certain areas and certain communities have drugs available, and we have different ways of tolerating drug sales and drug usage in different communities. America is kind of broken up and fragmented in that way, and that's not fair. Number 5, my biggest pet peeve, continuing programs that don't work at all. The DARE program is the best funded program that's been shown to never do anything in most studies, and in some studies actually increases marijuana usage. DARE is used across the entire US. DARE is not a nonprofit organization. Every police officer that does the DARE program is being paid for that. That is not community service. Number 6, high unemployment and inequality. People that can't get jobs are prone to addiction. Inequality and mistreatment of people also serves as a factor that's pro-addiction. And number 7, looking at dysfunctional families. Most of the people that have addiction are going to grow up in a family that has addiction already in it. And so if your mom or dad is an alcoholic, there is a 400% higher chance that you're going to be an alcoholic or an addict as well. If people were spending time looking at a young person in high school or middle school that has behaviors or a family history of addiction, those young people should be targeted for prevention education right away, and it doesn't happen at all. Number 8, a pro-drug media. I don't know if you guys have ever listened to any rap music at all recently, but guess what? Rap music really seems to be pro-alcohol, pro-drugs, and that was not the case before. And so now we have an entire media and music style dedicated to promotion of selling drugs and using drugs. Young people coming up that have listened to thousands and thousands of hours of rap music and watching their stars emulate that. So men seen as success objects, women seen as sex objects, begins to affect our psyche. Number 9, the war on drugs. Remember, the war on drugs is no longer quite the controversy that it was before. If anyone believes that we can arrest our way out of this drug problem, you please raise your hand right now. That's not going to happen. You cannot arrest every single drug and alcohol abuser and every single dealer. We don't have enough space for all these people. And number 11, another pet peeve of mine, pharmaceutical companies. Basically, right now, there's a free-for-all. Big Pharma can do and sell whatever it wants with no consequences. When Purdue Pharma was busted for lying about OxyContin and went into federal court, they said, here's the deal. We lied about OxyContin. We said it was not addictive at all. We lied to doctors, made up false charts and false graphs about this drug, and I'm really sorry. And by the way, maybe a few thousand people died because of this. All they got was a fine. Not one person did jail time, not one day. That's remarkable. And number 12, drug-pushing doctors. We got to be honest. Some of the worst drug dealers in our communities have medical degrees. And those are all your supportive features and policies that promote drug and alcohol usage in our community, and they're also pro-addiction. So what's negative for addiction? What is addiction not like? Well, let's be honest. Local law enforcement that stops access actually makes a difference. If you find a drug-saturated area and begin to target that area, you can begin to reduce the drug dealing that goes on there. And number 2, education and PSAs. People that have education, knowledge about drugs, have a better understanding, and that's helpful to families as well. We don't have enough education programs and prevention programs, especially when a person first comes into the court system. Here's an opportunity that needs to be used, and so a person has an MIP or a DUI or a cannabis possession charge. That person should be required to go to a prevention class to learn about addiction and how it happens. And so number 3, what really help a lot of people, that especially with heroin and other drugs, drug courts are very effective, and so are inpatient treatment centers. And I think that honestly, every single county should be required to have a drug or sobriety court. The mandate is very different. A probation officer working in a drug court cares about their client. They don't want to see them going to jail. They want their client to be sober. They take an active role almost as a therapist. I can't tell you how many good probation officers are out there that have made a huge difference in getting people sober. And so drug court programs definitely work. Number 4, AA and NA, the 12-step programs. NA is involving drugs, obviously. The only requirement for NA membership is a desire to stop using drugs. The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop using alcohol. AA and NA are completely free programs, and they're great places for someone to get a better understanding about addiction and, most importantly, how to stay sober. Number 5, media that promotes sobriety. When Eminem got sober, he made my job a hell of a lot easier. So any kind of media person or movies or music that promotes sobriety is helpful in reducing addiction in America. And number 6, I know it's not cool and sophisticated or like a cop coming out of an airplane, but basically therapy and counseling. Therapy and counseling are very effective in fighting addiction, and these are tools that are underutilized right now. Therapists can be playing a major role. If they get the family involved in the counseling, the success rates go up dramatically. And number 7, having job programs and education for people. Education seems to be another factor that gets self-esteem up. High self-esteem, high self-confidence, that is a factor that reduces addiction. Number 8, sports and exercise, especially with young women. If you get a daughter involved in a team sport, the odds of her becoming an alcoholic or an addict go down dramatically. Sports and exercise promotes a healthy lifestyle that can be another tool to prevent addiction in the family. And number 9, highly functional or functional families. Families that communicate, families that care, families that get involved and don't tolerate marijuana usage or underage drinking. Those families have the best support systems, and they reduce addiction inside that family for the young people. Number 10, tolerance of people different than you, right? In America, we need to have more tolerance of other people in all aspects. When people feel marginalized, they have a tendency to move towards these deviant groups and begin to abuse drugs and alcohol. And finally, number 12, high self-esteem. People with high self-esteem and high self-confidence have a very difficult time justifying putting drugs or alcohol into their system. Think about addiction from this format and from this paradigm. You're throwing a pebble into a little puddle, and that pebble ripples out. That's how addiction is. The individual ripples out into society, and society ripples back. Please learn more about addiction. Thank you for your time. Hi, I'm Raj Mehta. Welcome back to Ask the Therapist. We're defining addiction looking at basically the puddle paradigm of addiction, throwing that little pebble into the puddle and seeing the ripple effects that go outwards. And so we're talking about the micro level of addiction. And so the micro level of addiction is like this. Addiction is a bio, psychosocial, social, legal, financial, spiritual disease that is undergirded by damage and dysfunction in the reward feedback loop of the brain. Tragically, the most valuable real estate in the world, the mind, has been hijacked. Put simply and succinctly, it's the inability to get high successfully, because when addicts get high, they experience severe consequences. They get high when they're not supposed to. And when they try but can't control their using, they use more or less than they plan to. They have cravings to use, experience consequences when they do use, and can't control their using. That's the individual or the micro level. Now, on the macro level, on the societal level, addiction is a systemic failure. It's a failure of institutions, policies, and priorities, and stigma. We produce addiction in our society and create the very forces and agencies that support and encourage and promote it. America is only 5% of the world's population, and yet we consume about 50% of the world's drugs. Impressive. Now let's think about it. Are American genetics really that different from that of any other culture? How are our genes different? Remember, the old argument of nature versus nurture. Australia was formed from penal colonies, and those descendants populate their country. Based on those genetics, why don't they have higher levels of addiction and crime than the US? One example of a pro-addiction policy in America, in Michigan in particular, any amount of a controlled substance is a felony. 0 to 50 grams of heroin, Oxycontin, Xanax, Valium, Molly, or Adderall is a felony charge. People have received felonies for just having the powder residue on a mirror left by a friend. And by the way, in case you didn't know it, you can't even work at McDonald's with a felony conviction. Those people end up on a spiraling staircase down into further addiction, stigma, poverty, and dysfunction. Until the macro level changes, the micro level influences will only have minor effects. Just like when America dealt with racism and prejudice, it wasn't solved on the micro level. We couldn't go out and educate and persuade every single racist to change their views. That would be insane. We had to create policies, organizations, and laws to force change on those people. This is deep. In America, when it comes to locking people up and killing people, we will borrow billions of dollars from China. When it comes to helping people, healing people, and educating people, we look at each other with shoulders shrugged, saying, we ain't got no money. Thank you for your time. Welcome to Ask the Therapist. My name is Raj Mehta, and I have a very inspirational guest today. Today with me, I have Jeannie Richards from Brian's Hope, who I consider honestly a hero, a real American hero. And Jeannie, welcome to our show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Raj.
Glad to hear that. Jeannie, tell us a little bit about your organization, Brian's Hope, and why you formed it.
I started Brian's Hope about a year ago when I realized I was going to about one funeral every other month.
Wow.
For a young adult in my neighborhood that I knew personally, and they were dying of heroin. So I created a Facebook page called Heroin Epidemic in Waterford, Michigan.
Wow, okay.
And it blew up.
Really?
From there.
Wow. And so How about your personal issue with addiction? Have you dealt with addiction on your own or with your family?
Certainly with my family.
Okay.
In many capacities. The one that was the most heart-wrenching was with my 26-year-old son, Brian.
Okay, so Brian has passed away
Yes.
from a heroin overdose, as I recall.
Yes.
So what was Brian like when he was growing up as a young person? What was he like personality-wise and health-wise?
He was the second son of 3 boys, a total of 4 kids. My daughter came last. My oldest son is born a dwarf, so
Okay.
even though Brian was second,
Right.
he was always the biggest.
Right.
And he was very handsome.
Wow.
And very big. He was so helpful to me with the other kids, the
Okay.
handicapped son and the
Right.
younger kids.
So was he kind of like a leader, somebody you can actually count on when it came to getting things done and being responsible?
Around the house, domestically.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was absolutely a leader and so helpful to me.
That's great.
In the outs on the community, he was much more of a follower.
Okay, all right. He had his role in both sides, right?
Yes.
So when he was coming up, you noticed at any point during his adolescence where he might begin using drugs or alcohol or a behavior change possibly?
Actually, yeah, when he was about 12, 13 years old, it kind of started with more of a real aggressive behavior
Okay.
in school than
Right.
anything. And he was suspended often for incorrigible.
All right.
And finally, he was suspended permanently and sent to the courts.
This was in middle school or high school?
Middle school.
Wow, okay.
First year of middle school.
Right.
And he was put into a court-ordered school program, and one thing led to another,
Yeah.
and he could never complete one program.
Wow.
And from the age of 14 to 18,
Yeah.
he was in the juvenile justice system.
Okay. So how about with regards to alcohol and drug usage? When did that kind of begin for him?
When he was released at the age of 18,
Okay.
I want to say he probably started at that point acting like a normal teenager would have at 13, 14, but
Right.
because he got locked up,
Yeah, so he wasn't developing while he was in the system then.
no, he was just being babysat
Right.
and learning other great and wonderful
Was he receiving
things.
therapy or help while he was in there?
Not really, no.
Wow, that's another wasted opportunity. So when he gets out, you have him back at the house. What do you notice as far as, we're talking about hard drugs eventually going on to heroin. When do you first get an idea that he might be using the harder drugs?
I never knew beyond drinking some beer. He wasn't a real big drinker. I know he smoked pot, a lot of
Okay.
pot. And then I became aware of him taking Vicodins.
All right. How is he getting access to Vicodin?
He did have some injuries,
Okay.
a broken ankle, a couple back injuries that led him to medical visits and
Yeah, so the
and
doctors are giving him the
prescribed
Vicodin
them.
with, originally with real physical health issues in the
Yes,
beginning, right?
absolutely.
But later on, was he actually going doctor shopping and
Yes,
okay.
he was. When the doctor said, you know, you're not getting any more from me because your ankle's fine or your
Right.
back, he had a Blue Cross card
Oh, boy.
from me and my husband,
Right.
and he went anywhere and everywhere and got whatever he wanted
Yeah, that's amazing.
for $5 a script.
Right. And so in America right now, you know, with regards to prescribing of Vicodin and Oxycontin, all these drugs, America is only 5% of the world's population, and we consume 99% of the world's Vicodin. And those drugs are not coming, you know, from Mexico or from Colombia. Those drugs are coming from doctors and legitimate pharmacies. So is there a behavior change that begins to take place when he's using Vicodin?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I didn't notice it so much in the beginning, but I think as it progressed to where he was probably taking 20 at a time,
Wow.
I started certainly noticing, you know, even before the 20 at a time.
Right.
But, you know, it was just a lot of moodiness, irritability, or sleeping when you wouldn't expect them to
Right.
sleep, and be up cleaning when you wouldn't expect them to be up cleaning.
Yeah. And the pinpoint pupils too?
Yes.
Okay. And the nodding out?
That I didn't really notice until
Okay.
I realized he was on heroin.
Wow. And so as he's using Vicodin, is he ever going to come clean at some point and say, hey, Mom, I'm taking Vicodin, I can't stop. Will you get me help?
He never did.
Wow.
And I never figured it out, that he was taking them to alter his thinking and
Right.
feeling.
Yeah.
I always really thought when he was taking them, it was because he needed them. And to be honest with you, at that time, I didn't know that they were as addictive as they are.
Yeah, well, they come in a prescription bottle. So you're making an assumption that it's coming from a doctor, it's coming from a pharmacist, it must be medicine, it must be safe.
Yes.
So when does it begin to change? When do we jump from Vicodin to heroin? How old was he at that point?
What happened is at 26, he lost our insurance.
Okay,
And so he didn't have that Blue Cross card anymore.
Right.
So he couldn't go to the,
the golden ticket was gone.
exactly. So he started buying them.
Okay.
And he realized before he could get 30 for $5.
Right.
And now one could cost $5
Absolutely,
or more.
yeah.
And he couldn't afford that
A
after a
$5
while.
Vicodin, and then you're doing 20 a day, that's $100 a day worth of Vicodin. And also the damage to the liver. You know, Vicodin's filled with acetaminophen.
Absolutely, yes.
So now we're going on to heroin. Did you actually find needles or spoons around the house?
Well, at first I noticed spoons were missing. It should have been my first clue, and I share this with a lot of families now. If your spoons are missing, you might have a problem.
That's a very good point.
I had two granddaughters. I have two
Yeah.
small granddaughters, and I kept saying, boy, those girls are taking my spoons and
Right.
using them for playing
Right.
in the dirt. I had no clue
Yeah.
at all that my son was using them to cook up his drug.
Right, right.
And for the first 6 months that I was told, my son was 24, and I was told he was using heroin, I would not believe it.
Yeah.
I tuned it out.
Right.
I would secretively look for signs when I was around him.
Okay.
And I would justify anything I found
Yeah.
with, no, see, I know he's not doing
Right.
it. I just know he's not.
Yeah.
But one day, my granddaughters,
Uh-huh.
I thought were in the bathroom playing
Okay.
because the door was locked and I kept hearing noises in there. And
Yeah.
I told them to let me in and they wouldn't, so I went and
Wow.
got the bathroom key.
And?
I unlocked the door and my son was sitting on the toilet and he had the tourniquet
Oh,
thing
no.
on his arm and he was getting ready to inject a
Oh,
needle
wow.
in his arm.
Wow.
And so I finally realized at that point, oh my God.
Yeah, that must have been terrifying.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
It was very terrifying. And
Did he say, hey, Mom, there's a problem here, I need to get help?
He told me because I sort of leached to him
Yeah.
and tried to push his arm away.
Right.
And he told me to get out of the way before I get hurt.
Oh, God.
And he pushed me
That
out of the
shows you the
bathroom.
power of the
And he shut
addiction.
the door.
Right.
And he leaned up against it and he shot his drug up anyways.
Wow. I'm so sorry to hear that. When we deal with addiction, we talk about people that have prioritized their drug of choice over their parents, their family, their loved ones. Some people are given an ultimatum. Either, stop using heroin or you're going to lose your wife. The wife will say, I'm going to file for a divorce. And sadly, oftentimes, the man will choose heroin over his loved one, over his family. That shows you the power of addiction. Did any of his friends confide in you and kind of say, hey, Jeannie, here's the deal. We're worried about your son. He's using heroin now. Did anybody, any relatives, any other people outside of the family?
Not friends. Two of my relatives
Okay.
told me that I have heard that Brian's using the needle.
Right.
None of his friends, no one
Okay.
other than the two family members that had heard it.
Right. So now at this point, he's doing heroin. There's no way of kind of ignoring or having any denial, right?
Yes.
So where do you go to get help for a son that's on heroin?
Well, we first started with PACE.
Okay.
Because that's what we were told.
Yeah, that's the Oakland County funding source to get help, right?
Right.
So you call PACE.
We called PACE and he did an interview and came back for a bed.
Okay.
And he went to a facility and he didn't stay long. He
Right.
left
Okay.
because he didn't think
He
it
left
was working
AMA
out.
against medical advice. Does he come home after that?
Yes.
Okay. So is he going to any meetings, seeing a therapist? All right.
No.
Okay. And then moving along after that one visit, any other rehab visits after that?
We convinced him if you're going to stay with us, you're going to have to try another one.
Okay.
And we did, through the PACE office, find another one that was a little further north of our area in another
Right.
county.
Okay.
And it was a 2 or 3 week program, not a detox, just an inpatient.
Right.
And he did go and stay, and he was discharged honorably, if that's what you call it.
Yeah.
But he was in no way, shape, or form ready to return.
Right. So
Because
what's
he
his
started
aftercare
using
plan? Because essentially he's been detoxed at this point. He's off the drug. He's no acute medical detox. But what about the aftercare plan?
They would give him the name of a facility to call
Okay.
to make arrangements for outpatient
Right.
counseling therapy and advise him to find local NA meetings
Yeah.
to attend.
Right. And that's kind of generic. That's like the cookie cutter stamp of, here, this is where you're going to go to get help. So how about the Suboxone? When did that begin to be used by him?
After a couple of overdose and suicide failure
Wow.
attempts, I was able to have him committed to the psychiatric ward at University of Michigan.
Okay.
And it didn't take very long for him to convince them that he was fine.
Right.
And he needed to return.
He's a charming guy,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And yeah, and we all know addicts are very good at
Right.
manipulating and lying,
Yeah.
and deceiving, and so he was released, and I had said, well, you're going to have to try something more, you know. So he decided to try Suboxone.
Okay.
We were told of methadone and Suboxone, and
Right.
he wanted to try the Suboxone.
So what were you told as far as information about Suboxone? Was it told to be an addictive drug or a drug that actually gets you high?
No, it was just basically said to be something that would help curb your appetite for
Right.
the heroin. And it would be in place of, if you take it,
Exactly.
it would act as a,
A blocker?
Yeah.
Okay. So Suboxone is a Schedule III narcotic. Okay. Schedule III narcotics also include Vicodin and drugs like that. And so when a person goes from heroin to Suboxone, I mean, the harm reduction model, it is definitely safer, but the solution to a drug problem is never another drug, and that's counterintuitive. Don't fall for specious, ways of thinking. When a person says to you, we're going to get sober and give you methadone, it's a Schedule II narcotic. People are using methadone and Suboxone. They're physically present, but they're emotionally unavailable. So you must notice when your son was on Suboxone, it didn't appear like he was sober.
no, it did not. I couldn't tell if he was on heroin or Suboxone.
Wow.
He acted the same. He had the same look in his eye.
Right.
And
And as a mom, you recognize this isn't what sober looks like.
no, I was really not happy with the Suboxone results, and it really didn't last long, because after the first maybe 2 prescriptions, he literally would get the script filled and sell them before he ever came home.
Wow.
He would have a full tank of gas, a carton of cigarettes, and a whole bunch of heroin.
Oh boy. Remember, because Suboxone on the streets is about $8 a piece. Yeah, so you got,
A month's worth.
right, 90 Suboxone, you got a lot of money there, right? So what happens later on if you feel comfortable talking about his passing?
Well, I made peace with his passing because I did everything I knew to do at the time.
Okay.
And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing today with Brian's Hope.
Right.
I would like to be able to share this horrific journey so that maybe other people might be able to avoid it.
Yes.
And with Brian, we went in and out of different facilities, and we did have Blue Cross.
Right.
And we did entertain the idea of some of the more private, other than the PACE,
Yeah.
like Brighton and
Maple Grove too,
Grove.
right.
What I found with them, as well as PACE, is you have to have them ready
Yeah.
when the bed is available.
And the odds of that are what?
Not real good.
Yeah.
It only happened maybe 2 times
Right.
out of 6 tries.
Yeah.
And we didn't really have a lot of time. It escalated quite quickly from the time he started heroin until he died. It was 2 years. In the first 6 months, I was in complete denial.
Right.
For the next 18 months, tried helping him,
Yeah.
program after program, put him out of my house, sent him to Georgia to
Wow.
live with his biological father.
Did that help at all?
Not really, because he swapped alcohol
Yeah.
at the time for his drug of
Yeah,
choice. So he
addiction
was-
will mutate. It changes from one form to another. It goes from alcohol to heroin. It goes from heroin to marijuana. It goes back and forth.
He was only down there for 3 months, and he drank a lot. He didn't do heroin, but he came back against my wishes.
Right.
And he was back a week, and he was using heroin again.
Yeah.
And that was in September of 2011. And October was a pretty good month for us, even though
Okay.
September wasn't. He came back from Georgia, used right away.
Right.
I didn't let him stay with me.
Okay.
I don't know where he was staying, what he was doing, but in October he got a van somehow,
Okay.
legitimately,
Yeah.
and a job.
Okay.
So I let him come back home.
Right.
In October and November went fairly well, but by Thanksgiving he was using heroin again. I
Okay.
wasn't sure
Yeah.
if it was heroin, Suboxone. I just knew that he was using something.
Right.
And it got real ugly from Thanksgiving into December of 2011. He was a person we did not know.
Yeah.
The things he said to us were just horrible.
It steals your son away. It's like having a zombie
My son was
son.
gone for a long time
Yeah.
before that, but absolutely
Right.
made us realize our son was gone. We were forever finding him nodding,
Right.
coming in. We would come in from home, from work, or wherever, and he would be in the chair, and we really didn't know if he was
Yeah.
sleeping or if he was dead.
Right.
And after a while, it happened so many times. Especially like if me and my husband came in together, I'd
Right.
be like, "You check him," and
Yeah.
he would say, "I checked him last time. You check."
Wow, that's got to be emotionally fatiguing.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not funny, but
Right.
looking back now,
Yeah.
because in January, on Saturday the 28th, Brian had just, from Thanksgiving through Christmas through January,
Right.
he was only working barely, very little. He was
Okay.
sick often, unless he could get a drug,
Right.
whatever one, I don't know. He wasn't speaking to me. He was going in and out of his room, which was in the basement.
Right.
No, just totally isolated himself from us.
Like a vampire living in the basement, living at nighttime.
It was scary.
Yeah.
We were all really scared. My son, one of my sons, and my daughter, my husband, and myself. There were 4 others that lived in the home at the time. And on this particular day, I needed a crock pot from the
Right.
basement, and I sent my husband down to get it, and he came back upstairs, and I was in the bedroom going through a drawer, and he goes, "It's not looking good." And I said, "What, you can't find the crock pot?" And he said, "No, Brian."
Oh boy.
And he didn't need to say any more, because I could tell by the look on his face that
Right.
it was bad.
Right.
So I ran from my bedroom, which is at the back of the house, to the front of the house, which felt like it took forever.
Yeah.
And I had been saying for weeks, literally months, this isn't going to end well. He's going to die. I know. I can handle it.
You had
I
a
can do this.
premonition.
But during my run from
Yeah.
upstairs to get to him,
Yeah.
I kept saying, "Oh no, God, I was wrong. I take it back. I'm not ready.
Right.
Please don't let this be the time. I'm not ready. I take it back." And I ran through the basement, because of course his room was at the back. And when I ran into his room, he was sitting in the same clothes that he had wore the day before, and he was slumped forward on the
Yeah.
edge of his bed, and there was an end table, and he was kind of head down,
Yeah.
leaning, and I didn't see death at all. I totally felt like,
Right.
here's my chance. I'm going to revive him.
Yes,
All that I've
yes.
learned about naloxone,
Right.
I'm going to breathe for him until.
Right.
So I immediately tried to push him back on his back to lay him flat to
Right.
start doing the CPR, because I knew I could save him.
Yeah.
I just knew I could.
Yeah.
And my husband is in the background saying, "Stop. Stop." And I wasn't hearing him.
Right.
In my mind, I was going to save him. And I realized I couldn't push him back.
Right.
And I couldn't figure it out at the time why I couldn't push him back.
Yeah.
But he had been dead for 15 hours approximately, and rigor mortis had set in.
I'm so
he was
sorry to
stiff.
hear that. Yeah.
And I finally realized that, and whatever amount of time it took me, and I stood back and I looked and I saw the needle, was in his arm, but I had knocked it out of his arm
Right.
when I was trying to push him back.
Yeah.
So the needle was laying right there on the floor. The spoon was on the table. Everything was right there. And he was dead, and I couldn't save him or bring him back.
I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Jeannie. I'm so sorry. And I gotta say this because it's on my heart right now. I wanna apologize to you on behalf of every therapist that failed you, every professional that failed you and your son. There were so many opportunities to help your son and they were failed. And I wanna apologize to you for that. In a perfect world, we wouldn't be living like this, and this would be a priority in our world. treating addiction and helping people fight and get sober. And it seems to be like a secondary thing. I'm so sorry you had to go through this. And I want to comment about Jeannie right now. A lot of people, when they face adversity, they have the option to fight, flight, or freeze. And you look what Jeannie's done with her life, the loss of her son and that tragedy and being there firsthand. And she chose to fight, and she began Brian's Hope. And this organization is so helpful and so beneficial. It is a resource. It's brianshope.org, as I recall, right?
brianshope.org.
And is anyone welcome to go there and ask questions, get information?
Anyone, everyone. Our website is maintained by a couple of wonderful volunteers, and they're doing a super terrific job with it. We have community meetings once a month, and we've had 12 of them a whole year now. Each one of our community meetings, we offer something different.
Great.
A speaker or someone that is like yourself, someone that's recovered, someone, we've had the different drug companies come out and share with us the drug possibilities for those that choose that method of treatment.
Right.
We've tried to offer to the community, because that was the thing. I didn't know some of these things even existed when my son was in this.
And that's the problem, is that the lack of information and the communication's not there. Please tell me about some of the policies that you're trying to implement and change, or have changed in Michigan in particular.
One thing that was so huge to me is the naloxone. It's an antidote reversal drug that, if given to an overdose opiate person within a reasonable amount of time, you can bring them right out of death.
Absolutely.
Grip.
It is a lifesaver.
And
it's a miracle drug.
Other states are using it and are showing us extreme success rates in the decrease of overdose deaths. And I thought it's a no-brainer. We should have that here, but we didn't have it in Michigan. In fact, there's a lot of things that we didn't have in Michigan, but the bills were kind of all there. They just really weren't being, they were sitting. And so a lot of noise, particularly I know, not just on Brian's Hope, but on many others in the last year.
Well, families involved too. Families Against Narcotics was supportive on those issues as well.
Yes, they were. We wrote lots of letters, made many phone calls, emails. We wanted to see folks be able to call 911 in the event of an overdose, and the 911 caller not to get in trouble. The way
it shouldn't be a crime to help somebody.
The way our law in Michigan was, the caller could get in trouble, and did in most cases, and the same for the victim.
Half of the overdoses that occurred where a person was next to the individual, they could have saved them, and they were afraid because they couldn't call for help, because if I get caught here, I get a felony charge.
Yes. And people are being rolled out of cars and left on the side of the road. And sometimes they're not even dead. They're just breathing so shallow that the person that's with them thinks they're dead because they're high and freaked out anyways. And something as simple as
Narcan would have saved them, absolutely.
And so Governor Snyder did, on October 13 of this year, sign the package into law.
News.
Public Act 311, 312, 313, and 314 is what it's called. Basically, it breaks down to where medical people that are administering it with good faith can't be prosecuted if the person doesn't revive.
That's a good starting point. But how about other people, civilians?
There is a civilian component to it. It is, I believe, the 314. You are immune from civil liability if you, in good faith, administer this drug and the person doesn't live. But I'm a little concerned because as I continuously read up on the legislation, except for the last 2 weeks because I've had a broken arm I've been dealing with.
I appreciate you being here, even with your broken arm. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Takes my mind off of it. I have noticed that the implementation date had not been set in this particular one, like in the other three. So I'm a little concerned about that because Brian's Hope wants to start doing naloxone trainings. We have purchased the naloxone kits.
That's fantastic.
We've done everything that the law has required. We just want to make sure that we do everything exactly the way that's supposed to be done.
That's fair.
As soon as we can do it, we'll be doing it.
That's great. Any other things you want to comment on as well as regards to changing policy in Brian's Hope?
I know that there was a House bill this past year, 4486, that did pass into the House. Senate has it right now, and I'm sorry, Senate doesn't have it. It is in question because we're not sure how to enforce it.
Right.
That is something that my legislative committee is going to be working on this year. Because now that we have a law that says when we have an individual that's clearly got a substance abuse problem,
right,
and they're a danger to themselves and others,
yeah,
you can commit them.
Absolutely.
A family member can sign,
yeah,
have them committed. The problem is they're not doing this right now. It's not being enforced.
It needs to, remember, in the old days, they'd say the person has to reach their bottom. They have to realize they want help. Because of heroin addiction, we don't have that luxury. We don't have time to wait around for someone to have an epiphany and go, oh my God, I'm using heroin, things are really bad, I need to go to rehab. Oftentimes, when a person's sticking a needle in their arm, they're not doing any good thinking at all. We gotta do their thinking for them.
That's how it should be.
Yeah.
We do it for those that are mentally unable.
Yeah,
and
people that are challenged and handicapped, or people that have severe autism.
And they're
we're
in
here to
locked
help.
facilities
Absolutely.
even. And the treatment centers for these folks, my son just kept walking away.
Right.
I think that there's some big important changes.
Those are areas for growth, and those are areas for change.
Yes.
And I thank you for all that you do. Absolutely fantastic. God bless you and all your work, Jeannie.
My son's death's not going to be in vain, Raj.
Absolutely not.
Something good is going to come of it.
I know it and I feel it.
I'm sure of it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Ask the Therapist. We're going to handle our questions right now, and the first question is, what do you do if you find your kids using drugs? It's one of the most common things that I hear from families that call me or parents. They're concerned they find their kid with marijuana paraphernalia, or maybe some pills they can't identify, or some powder. And so oftentimes my first suggestion to a parent is, we need more information. You've got to do your reconnaissance. And so every major pharmacy, Walgreens, Myers, carries a 10-panel or 12-panel drug test. And you give your kid the drug test. And the philosophy is, you come home with the drug test and you meet your kid, and you say, hey, we love and care about you. We're very concerned. We want to know if you're taking drugs or abusing them. Will you please pee in this cup? At that point, the kid has two possibilities. He can say, yes, I'm going to pee in the cup, or no, I'm not going to pee in the cup. Obviously, a no is a default, I'm taking drugs. So if the kid says no, don't fall for the anger trap. Say, son or daughter, obviously you have a drug problem, you won't pee in this cup, and I appreciate you telling me that, and we're going to get you further help and assistance, and you walk away. The other problem with drug testing, though, is oftentimes a kid will see the drug test and notice something very interesting. It's not just a test for marijuana. And so a lot of kids will say, okay, mom, dad, you got me. I am smoking pot, and not pee in the cup. And the purpose of that is copying to the lesser plea. Most parents are much more agreeable about dealing with marijuana. They feel kind of a false sense of safety. The kid's just smoking marijuana. The only way that marijuana can kill the kid is if 500 pounds falls on top of his head, so we'll kind of sort it out at home. The kid is trying to avoid being drug tested because the truth is they're taking other drugs, such as possibly Adderall, Oxycontin, heroin, Vicodin, ketamine, all the other rave drugs. And so the issue is to get more information. Jeannie, what do you think about this question? What do you do if your kids are found with some drugs or drug paraphernalia? What do you suggest for parents?
Well, I absolutely would do things a lot different now.
Thank you, right?
And I would totally drug test.
Okay.
And one good thing about Brian's Hope is JAMS has partnered with us, and
wow.
They will allow our families to come in
really?
For a it might be a 12 or 20 panel. Don't quote me, but
probably
it's a very large panel drug
that's
test
the big
for
one.
$5.
Yeah, that's very reasonable. That's probably at cost.
Yeah, it is at cost, and they're doing that as a courtesy to our families so that we can. You got to know what you're up against.
Yes.
You can't fight what you can't, what you don't know.
And you don't treat marijuana addiction like you do heroin addiction. They're much different. Absolutely.
Professional help. I suggest family counseling.
Right.
It has made all the difference in the world for our family.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And the individual themselves, absolutely.
Right.
Counseling.
When we get the families involved, the success rate gets so much higher. It's very important. Mom and dad need to know what the drugs are and what the actual effects are, and know how to identify when the kid's been abusing them.
I agree. And also, I learned that there's ways to, when they are high and
Yeah.
they come in,
Right.
there's things you say and do and things you don't.
Yeah.
And you learn that kind of stuff in the support groups from families that have already been through
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
Because, you know, taking on them when they come in and they're
Right.
all inebriated
Right.
up or whatever.
And
it
our
can be
philosophy
ugly.
is that we love our son, we love our daughter, but we hate their disease. And so we'll do everything possible to get you sober and get you off drugs, and we'll do nothing at all to help you or enable you to continue getting high. That needs to be the philosophy. We love our son, we hate his disease. We love our daughter, we hate her disease. And oftentimes when the kids come home and the parents are like, well, you know, they're acting inappropriate or they're shouting and yelling, you know, you have the right to say, you know what, I'm not talking to my kid, I'm talking to addiction right now. I want my kid back.
Absolutely.
Yeah, communication is the key.
Yeah, it is. And they want to shut us out so bad.
Right, because they're scared, absolutely. And question number 2, the big question, when is it time for an intervention? And so the idea on an intervention, people have seen the TV show Intervention. It's very common, it's on A&E, it's available on YouTube. The premise of the show is that basically a family comes to a professional and their loved one is abusing alcohol or hard drugs most oftentimes, and the person will not stop using. Remember, there's 4 D's in addiction. The first D is denial, and denial stands for don't even know I'm a liar. The second D is going to be distract. The kid wants to say, well, Mom, I got depression, or Mom, me and my girlfriend broke up. You got to focus on that first. And the other D is called delay. Oftentimes the kid will say, you know what, you're right, I do have a drug problem, you know, I am sticking a needle in my arm, but here's the deal, I can't get help right now. I gotta finish up this one project, I gotta break up with my girlfriend, I gotta get my warts removed, you know, and they keep delaying. Sadly, some kids are so good at delaying, they delay getting help until they die. And the 4th D, this is the D that I hate the most. This D happens in addiction, and it's called divide. When a person is abusing drugs and alcohol, they'll divide the family up. They'll make the siblings angry at each other. They'll make mom and dad angry at each other. They'll point at each other and blame each other. And before you know it, these families are broken up and divorced, and the kid's off using drugs with no consequences. So when it comes down to talking about a time for an intervention, you want to contact a professional. It's probably not a good idea to do an intervention on a person that's just using marijuana. But a person that's drinking alcohol daily, a person that's using heroin or any kind of IV drugs or hard drugs is a great candidate for intervention. And intervention is a tool to get a person into rehab. It's not a solution to addiction. It jumpstarts the process. I can make a person's bottom happen as soon as I want to, as long as I have mom and dad involved. I can make your using so miserable, you're going to want to go to rehab. I can have mom and dad say, you can no longer live here, we're not going to pay for your cell phone. I can have your girlfriend say, I'm breaking up. I can have your boss say that you're fired. We can call the local police and have you followed around. You know, our job is to make a person's using so miserable, they come around and say, you know what, this treatment option seems pretty good right now. I wish we lived in a world where everyone could kind of, you know, figure stuff out on their own. But the drugs are so powerful and they're so toxic, they begin to affect a person's ability to make good decisions. Jeannie, what do you think about the idea behind interventions?
I love the idea behind intervention, and I think you should implement it as soon as you, like you said, realize there's drug use going on.
Right.
Because don't wait till it's at abuse or till they get to the heroin, because I think it's too late by then a lot of times.
And parents don't know what to say. You need a professional to go in there and put a team together that, you know, has a person come in there and you say, here's how you used to be, here's how drugs and alcohol changed you, and now today you have to go to rehab. It's a 3-part play, and every intervention letter is the same. How the kid was before, and how the kid was changed by drugs, and the expectations for today. It's a very powerful letter. It also gives people a voice. Many parents have never had the chance to tell their kid, you know, accurately and explicitly, here's how I feel when you use drugs. You know, I meet people that abuse heroin, and when I talk to them, I'll say, well, what kinds of feelings would make you want to use more heroin? Well, the kid says, well, when I feel more depressed, or when I feel angry, or when I feel frustrated, or when I feel lonely, and when I feel scared. And I say, really, so those are the kinds of emotions that make you want to use more heroin? And they go, yeah. I look over at the mom, I say, hey, Mom, when your kid's on heroin, how do you feel? Angry, frustrated, lonely, scared? All the same feelings that your kid is using heroin to mask are the feelings that he's actually inducing on you as the parent. And that's not fair.
The addict the families become hostages,
Yes.
without a doubt.
Right.
And what it does to the siblings, I'm still seeing effects on my
Yeah.
kids
Right.
that are left behind.
Everyone needs
from
to
what's
heal.
happened to
It's like
Brian.
having a hurricane come through your house. Now it's time for everyone to heal and kind of put things back in order.
And we've all took a different path to healing
Yeah.
in my family.
Right.
This was my way of healing.
Yeah.
My kids are choosing different ways, and I don't know what's right or what's wrong,
Yeah.
because I don't think there's a lesson book on this either.
Right.
But I know that the families are just devastated by
Yeah.
the acts of a addict, especially when and if they pass.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Our last question is number 3. And it's, where can I find out more about drug terms and slang? I always encourage parents, information is power. Get access to your kids' social media. Get access to their cell phone. Get access to their Facebook. See what they're talking about and what they're doing. And so, website like urbandictionary.com, you can decipher what the code is in the cell phone. You can decipher the words on Facebook by going to arrowwood.com. Arrowwood.com lists basically every drug that can get you high, and you can read about personal testimonials. Kids sadly get a lot of information from there, but it's a great resource for parents. So with regards to dealing with slang terms and knowledge, kids have their own code. Think about addiction in the forms of a cult. When someone joins a cult, their language begins to change, their behavior begins to change, their demeanor. And so to get more information, you want to go to urbandictionary.com and arrowwood.com. Jeannie, what do you think about these slang terms and ways of kind of keeping things under wraps?
That is exactly what they do. They kind of go undercover, they become a different person, and they take on a new language. And those are the 2 best websites you just listed that I have ever found.
Good.
And I knew about the urban one before my son had passed.
Right.
But this other one I
Yeah.
just recently learned of in this past year, and it still blows me away to this day, the things that I learned from
Yes,
that.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Jeannie for being here, my honored guest. You're absolutely fantastic. Knowledge is power, so please reach out, get more information, and contact SerenityHelp.com. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope this was helpful and I hope this made sense. Only you can make a difference. Remember, the meaning of life is very simple. You are born, you try to make yourself relevant, and then you die. Go out and make yourself relevant. Fortune favors the bold.